Some connections between humans and their dogs are beyond explanation. In the quiet town of Redwood Hill, Washington, a deeply moving story was about to unfold. One that will remind anyone who heard just how powerful love, loyalty, and memory can be, even across years of separation. It was a crisp afternoon when Rachel Moore's world quietly shifted. A middle school art teacher, Rachel had spent most of her adult life in this peaceful Pacific Northwest town. She loved the scent of pine in the early hours, the mist weaving through forest trails, and the quiet comfort of her front porch, where she often sipped tea while sketching in her notebook. Though content in her solitude, she occasionally visited the Redwood County Animal Shelter just to be near animals. She never planned to adopt, but one bright spring day, everything changed. In the far corner of the shelter, she noticed a young German shepherd sitting quietly, alert but calm. His deep brown eyes scanned the room, not with fear, but as if searching for something familiar. He didn't bark like the others. As Rachel stopped in front of his kennel, he slowly stood, walked to the bars, and gently pressed his forehead against them. Their eyes met, and something stirred, a soft recognition, like meeting an old friend. Rachel crouched and whispered, "Hey there, buddy." And the dog wagged his tail just once, then sat, watching her without blinking. The moment reminded her of a childhood book she'd loved, Bruno the Brave, a story about a loyal shepherd who always found his way back home. Without thinking, she turned to the shelter volunteer and asked, "What's his name?" The young man shrugged. "He doesn't have one yet." Rachel smiled softly. "He does now. His name is Bruno." That spring afternoon marked the beginning of something that would change both of their lives forever. Bruno adjusted quickly to life with Rachel. In just a few weeks, he seemed to know the rhythm of her days. Each evening, he would wait patiently by the window for the sound of her old car pulling into the driveway. As soon as she opened the front door, he would greet her with a low, happy bark and circle her legs, his tail wagging like a metronome of joy. At night, he curled up on the edge of her bed, his breathing soft and steady as she read aloud from one of her favorite novels. On weekends, they walked the forest trails together, the cool air filled with pine and the crunch of leaves under their feet and paws. Rachel felt more grounded with Bruno by her side, like a part of her had finally returned home. She took care of him like family. He had the best food, regular checkups, and his thick fur was brushed until it gleamed. Following the shelter's advice, she had a microchip placed under his skin, a small act of protection she hoped never to need, but nothing could prepare her for the day he disappeared. It was early October, and the maple trees in Redwood Hill were glowing in hues of golden fire. Rachel was outside, rearranging pots in her small garden, while Bruno lay sunbathing on the porch. She stepped inside for just a minute to grab a watering can, leaving the gate slightly ajar. When she returned, Bruno was gone. At first, she wasn't worried. He'd wandered into the yard before and always came back. But as the minutes stretched and shadows grew longer, unease crept in. Rachel called his name, walked through the neighborhood, peered behind sheds and fences, calling Bruno again and again. The sound of her voice grew more frantic as dusk fell. By nightfall, panic took over. She grabbed a flashlight and scoured every alley, trail, and wooded corner she could reach, her voice breaking from shouting. The next morning, Rachel contacted every local shelter and animal control office. She printed dozens of flyers and handed them out at gas stations and grocery stores. She refreshed online pet recovery listings every hour, heart sinking each time no one responded. Days turned into weeks. The wind turned colder, and Bruno's absence wrapped around her like a constant chill. Every night, she left an old blanket on the porch, one he used to sleep on, hoping the scent of home might guide him back. Each morning, she checked it, only to find it untouched. Sometimes, hope survives in the smallest corners of the heart. Even after years of silence, Rachel never changed her phone number. Something in her, however quiet, refused to let go completely. And one cold, gray morning in early March, 7 years after Bruno vanished, the phone finally rang. It was the Redwood County Animal Shelter. A volunteer on the other end hesitated, then said, "We found a German shepherd wandering near the edge of town. He's older, looks rough, thin, tired. We scanned him. The chip still lists you as the owner." His name is Bruno." Rachel froze. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely hear the rest. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "Completely," the voice replied. "It's him." Without grabbing a coat or even locking the door, Rachel was already in her car, hands shaking on the steering wheel. Rain began to fall as she drove, but she barely noticed. All she could see were memories. Bruno as a pup running beside her through leaves, resting his head on her lap during long nights. Could it really be him? At the shelter, they led her to a quiet room. Inside a small kennel was an old German shepherd curled into himself, ribs visible, fur matted. One ear was torn, and his left eye was clouded over from an untreated infection. But when Rachel knelt and softly whispered, "Bruno," something stirred. He lifted his head slowly. He sniffed the air, then turned toward her voice. His good eye locked onto hers, and a soft, trembling whine escaped his throat. Rachel gasped, reaching her hand toward the bars. "It's me, boy. It's me." With effort, Bruno stood unsteady on his legs. He hobbled forward and pressed his thin body against her hand, letting out a sound somewhere between a growl, a cry, and something heartbreakingly human, as if he too had been waiting all these years. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Even the shelter workers wiped their eyes in silence. Rachel didn't hesitate. She filled out the paperwork with trembling fingers. Bruno was going home, back at her cottage. She had never fully packed away his things. His old toys, his bowl, even his worn-out blanket had all been kept in a corner of the closet, just in case. She cleaned a warm spot beside the fireplace, added a padded bed, and gently laid Bruno there. He curled up instantly, letting out a deep, exhausted sigh as if saying, "I made it." The first few days were hard. Bruno barely ate. Rachel used a small syringe to feed him special recovery food, drop by drop. She gave him medicine, cleaned his infected eye, and sat beside him for hours, reading aloud like she had years ago. Her voice, once a simple comfort, now felt like a lifeline, a reminder that he was safe. Gradually, signs of life returned. His fur began to soften. His legs remained weak, but his eyes followed Rachel closely now. When she spoke, he responded with small, hoarse sounds and slow wags of his tail. One afternoon, she found a crinkled toy ball in a box of his old things and gave a shake. Bruno's ear twitched. Then, with effort, he lifted a paw and tapped it at once. It wasn't much, but to Rachel, it meant the world. Though his body was healing, the scars of Bruno's past life lingered deep inside him. Loud noises made him flinch violently. A car door slamming or the clang of a dropped pot would send him scrambling under the couch, his whole body trembling. Sudden movements startled him. Rachel quickly learned to move more slowly, speak more softly, and adjust her home to make Bruno feel safe. She placed small night lights around the house to ease the shadows that seemed to frighten him. She kept doors open so he could always find her. Even her routines changed. She stopped vacuuming during the day and no longer listened to music loudly. For Rachel, it wasn't a burden. It was love. In those early weeks, Bruno followed her like a shadow. When she cooked, he lay at her feet. When she sat to grade papers or sketch, he would curl up beside her, pressing against her leg. At night, he often woke up just to check if she was still there, nudging her hand or resting his head on her arm before falling asleep again. His need for closeness was raw, vulnerable, and desperate, and Rachel gave it to him every moment of every day. Then, just when it seemed like things were finally beginning to feel stable, something went terribly wrong. One quiet afternoon, Rachel was cleaning up in the kitchen when she heard a sharp cry behind her. She turned just in time to see Bruno collapse. His legs gave out, and his body began to shake violently. Foam gathered at the corners of his mouth as he convulsed, his paws twitching helplessly. "Bruno!" Rachel screamed, dropping the dish towel and rushing to his side. Her heart raced as she tried to steady him, calling his name again and again. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands, dialing the animal emergency clinic, mistyping the number twice in her panic. "Redwood Veterinary Emergency," came a calm voice. "How can I help?" "My dog. He's having some kind of seizure. He collapsed. Please help me. Please bring him in immediately." the receptionist instructed. Dr. Werner is on shift. Rachel wrapped Bruno in his blanket and ran to the car. Her breath caught in her throat as she drove. "Stay with me, Bruno," she whispered. "Don't leave me. Not now. Not after everything." When she arrived, the clinic staff met her at the door and rushed Bruno to the back. Dr. Werner, a kind-faced man in his 40s, quickly took charge. "Tell me what happened," he asked gently. "He was fine, and then he just cried out and collapsed," Rachel replied, her voice trembling. "I found him again after 7 years. I can't lose him again. Please." Dr. Werner nodded, already preparing the scans. "We'll do everything we can." After what felt like an eternity of tests, x-rays, and blood work, Dr. Werner returned with a concerned look on his face. He held up a set of images on a tablet and pointed to a bright object glowed deep inside Bruno's abdominal cavity. "There's a metal fragment lodged in here," he said quietly, "possibly from an old injury. His body formed scar tissue around over time, but recently it may have shifted, which could explain the seizure." Rachel stared at the screen in disbelief. "Metal inside him?" Dr. Werner nodded. "We think it might be a shard of a car bumper or another piece of debris. Considering he was likely hit or injured years ago while living as a stray, it would make sense. Can you remove it?" Rachel asked, her voice tight. "Yes," he said slowly, "but I need to be honest about the risks. Bruno is old. His organs are fragile. The surgery is delicate, and it carries about a 40% mortality rate in dogs with his condition." Rachel's heart clenched. "What happens if we don't do it?" "If it shifts again, it could pierce his stomach or major blood vessels. That would likely result in internal bleeding or severe infection. Either way, he wouldn't survive long." For a moment, the room was quiet, filled only with the softening machines and the quiet beating of Rachel's terrified heart. "Then we have to try," she said firmly. "He didn't survive 7 years out there just to die like this." Dr. Werner nodded, his expression serious. "We'll prep him for surgery right away. Dr. Patel is our surgical specialist. She'll lead the procedure." Before they took Bruno in, Rachel was allowed a brief moment with him. He lay inside a small oxygen chamber, and 4 attached his leg, his breathing labored but steady. Rachel knelt beside him and whispered, "Hey, sweet boy, you're so brave. The doctors are going to help you now. Okay? You just have to hold on." Bruno's ear twitched slightly. His eye fluttered open for a second, enough to recognize her scent and voice. That tiny flicker of acknowledgement sent tears down Rachel's cheeks. Moments later, Dr. Patel entered, calm, focused, and kind. "The metal is located near sensitive organs," she explained. "The operation will be precise and risky, but I believe we have a good chance." Rachel nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Just do whatever you can. He means everything." As they wheeled Bruno away, Rachel stood frozen, hands clenched at her chest. She whispered under her breath like a prayer, "Come back to me." The waiting room felt like an eternity. She held Bruno's old blanket close, tears soaking into the worn fabric. Each minute passed like an hour. Finally, after what felt like an entire lifetime, the doors opened again, and Dr. Patel stepped out. Her surgical cap still sat on her head, and her scrubs were slightly wrinkled. Her face was tired, but her eyes held a glint of something that made Rachel's heart leap. "The surgery was more complex than expected," she began, "but we got it." She held up a small sealed container. Inside it sat a jagged metal shard, no longer than a finger, darkened and worn. "It looks like part of a car bumper," she said. "It was lodged deep near his intestines, but we managed to remove it completely. Fortunately, there was no perforation." Rachel let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "When can I see him?" "He's in recovery now. You can sit with him, but he's still under anesthesia. The next 24 hours are critical, but I'm optimistic." They led her to a quiet recovery room. Bruno lay on a soft warming pad, connected to several monitors. His belly had been shaved, revealing a line of neat, tiny stitches. His chest rose and fell slowly, each breath labored but steady. Rachel sat beside him and placed her hand on his paw. "You did it, brave boy," she whispered. "You're still here." Tears slid down her cheeks, but this time they were mixed with something new. Gratitude, relief, and fragile, blooming hope. For the first time in years, she felt like things might just be okay. The first night after surgery was restless. Rachel stayed by Bruno's side in the recovery room, barely blinking. Nurses came and went, checking monitors, adjusting for drips, but her focus remained fixed on his slow, steady breaths. Each rise and fall of his chest was a quiet promise. He's still here. By morning, Bruno stirred. His eye fluttered open for longer this time. When Rachel spoke his name softly, his ear twitched and his tail gave the faintest of thumps against the blanket. It wasn't much, but it meant the world. Over the next few days, Bruno's strength returned little by little. He began eating soft food, drinking on his own. His steps were still shaky, but he walked a few feet each day with encouragement from the staff and Rachel's steady voice calling. "That's it, brave boy. One more step." After a week, Bruno was clear to go home. Back at the cottage, Rachel had transformed the living room into a peaceful recovery space. Cushions lined the floor, and his favorite old toys were placed nearby. She spent hours sitting beside him, reading aloud or just resting her hand on his back. Something shifted in Bruno. As his body healed, so did his heart. He began sleeping more. Soundly, no longer waking up every hour in panic. He would wag his tail when Rachel walked in. His eyes followed her with calm instead of fear. And one afternoon, he did something he hadn't done in years. He barked. Just once. A soft, alert wolf at the sound of squirrel outside. Rachel laughed through tears. "There you are," she whispered. "That's my Bruno." In the weeks that followed, life found a new rhythm. Rachel reconnected with friends she hadn't spoken to in years. She smiled more at school, even joined a community gardening group. She also grew close to a man named Noah, a gentle, kind-hearted wildlife rescue volunteer who had once helped her search when hope felt like a foolish thing to hold on to. Sometimes Noah would visit in the evenings. They'd sit on Rachel's porch sipping tea while Bruno dozed in the golden light near their feet. The bond between woman and dog had deepened, whether by time, loss, and a quiet resilience that neither of them had words for. At night, Bruno would lie beside Rachel as she read, his head gently resting on her lap, his good eye watching her with a calm that only comes from knowing, "I am safe. I am home." Rachel would whisper the same thing every night. "You'll never be alone again." And in that promise, they both finally found peace.